She wasn't the strongest, nor the fastest. She went unnoticed in the line, in the cold, in the silence of meetings, and on the frozen nights where each step echoed as if it were the last. While others spoke loudly, vied for leadership, and mocked one another, she simply observed. She didn't care to be noticed, she didn't need approval. Her fixed gaze on the frozen horizon was mistaken for distraction, her stillness for weakness. But there was something about that girl no one understood. She heard what others ignored, the whisper of the wind on the ice, and that whisper held secrets. She knew, not by intuition alone, but by experience. While others used their coats as armor against the world, she transformed the cold into an ally. She walked alone through the snow in the early morning hours, unafraid of the hollow sound beneath her feet. She had learned to read the ground, to hear the cracks of nothingness, to decipher the silence, and it was this silence that now, little by little, began to announce that something was about to happen. They saw her as fragile, small, insignificant. She was the last to receive food, the first to be forgotten in decision-making. When there were chores, they left her with the scraps. When there were jokes, she was the target. But she never fought back. She just smiled and returned to her silent vigil. She didn't sleep like the others. She spent nights awake watching the sky, the movement of the clouds, the direction of the wind, as if receiving warnings no one else was willing to hear. There was one night in particular when the ice seemed to tremble slightly, so subtly that no one noticed, except her. The air changed. The scent of the fog brought something metallic, strange, out of place, and even with the moon hidden behind heavy clouds, she saw it, not with her eyes, but with her soul, and she understood. A warning, a call, a wake-up call, but who would listen? Who would listen to the one who had never even been considered part of the group? The expedition leader, arrogant and impatient, ignored her completely. The others, too preoccupied with their own vanity, continued as if nothing were out of the ordinary. Even in the face of the signs, the increasing crackling, the disappearing animals, the abnormally fluctuating temperature, no one retreated. Only she retreated, one step at a time. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. She knew where the safe spot was. She had mapped it days before, silently, alone. She knew where the ice was thickest, where the wind pushed away danger, where the rock beneath the snow offered shelter. But she also knew that no one would follow her without falling first. No one would reach out until the ground gave way. And it was about to happen. The days passed as if they were repetitions of a foretold error. And on the fourth day, as everyone laughed around the fire, mocking her warnings, which were never spoken aloud but only hinted at in looks and gestures, the sound came. A sound that could no longer be ignored. The ice screamed. A dry, deep crack, as if something were breaking beneath the feet of the world. The silence that followed was colder than the air. She didn't run. She was already far away. She knew exactly where to stop. And it was there, from afar, that she saw the eyes of others finally seek her out. For the first time, not with contempt, but with desperation. And in that moment, she didn't need to say anything. She just nodded. And they started running. After her. After the only one who had heeded the wind's warning. After the only one who had never mocked the ice. Because now they knew. It was her or the end. And you who are here with me, if you've reached this point in the video, it's because you too feel like something is about to break beneath your feet. Maybe it's not the ice, but the invisible structure on which your life rests. Maybe you too have been underestimated, ignored, ridiculed, and deep down you know you carry something that no one else can see, the gift of perceiving before you fall, the sensitivity to hear what the world does, everything it can, to stifle. So if this story resonates with you, like it now and subscribe to the channel, because what we're about to reveal in the next few minutes could be your turning point. Here, every detail has meaning. Every silence hides a key. And perhaps you weren't brought here by chance. Now tell me in the comments with just one sentence, have you ever been ignored until they realized you were the only one with a way out? While they laughed at the ice had the last laugh. That was the phrase that would echo in their minds when it was too late. Their disdain for what seemed harmless was their collective mistake. The sound of laughter was constant. They mocked the cold, the predicted storms, the exaggerated protocols, the warnings from the weather station. They turned danger into a joke, as if the hostile environment surrounding them were merely a stage for military bravado. But there was someone there who wasn't laughing. Someone who didn't treat the ice as a landscape, but as a character, and that someone silently knew that ice doesn't forgive the arrogant. She observed everything. The jokes around the makeshift campfire, the silly challenges of going out without full equipment, the games of sliding down the frozen corridors as if they were in an amusement park. The men beat their chests, saying they'd faced worse, that it was nothing, that nature was a detail under the control of human strength. But listening to these words, she remembered the imperceptible cracks she'd seen near the thermal generator. She remembered the almost whispering sound of ice sheets moving beneath the surface layer of the base, and the red alert flashing for a few seconds before disappearing from the main screen. What to them was a joke, to her was prelude. They didn't know it, but the ice was alive. It breathed slowly, deeply, and mercilessly, and everything about it was a language. The wind that changed direction without explanation, the water that suddenly flowed through the pipes, the pressure that made doors stick. It was as if this environment was testing their pride, and one by one the soldiers failed the test, tripping over their own pride. On the mornings they went out for reconnaissance, they mocked the layers of ice covering their vehicles. They called it clown ice. It came only to annoy, not to scare. But she knew that this same ice had destroyed entire bases in the northern part of the continent. She knew that the structure they were using as shelter had failed deep freeze tests 5 years ago, but had been rebuilt to cut costs. She knew that the heat from the internal system was slowly melting the external stability. While everyone laughed at the ice, she understood that it was a patient enemy. The commander, always arrogant, declared loudly that no man would freeze to death with a good coat and a bottle of cognac. It sounded like heroism, but it was pure ignorance. She, on the other hand, reviewed the temperature records without being told to. Hidden away, she sketched the patterns of temperature drop and noticed a phenomenon that local science had not yet reported. The cold, there was not just climatic, it was almost behavioral. It rose and fell with a strange logic, as if responding to human actions. It was the kind of intuition that only those who listen to silence perceive. The night everything changed, she had already left signs. She placed warnings on the panels, adjusted the sensors, wrote reports that no one read. She tried to verbalize the risk but was ridiculed. "Are you afraid of the ice?" they asked. "Will the ice swallow the base?" they mocked. "Do you want us to run away like little children afraid of the dark?" She simply remained silent. She knew there was no point in competing with inflated egos, but she also knew that when the ice spoke loudly, she would be the only one who understood its language. And the ice spoke, not with words but with deep cracks, with wind currents piercing walls, with blocks shifting millimeter by millimeter, creating fissures where structure had once stood. The temperature plummeted so abruptly that electronic systems failed. The generators froze from within, as if invaded by an invisible force. The doors jammed, the exits were blocked, and the laughter vanished. For the first time, the group understood they weren't playing a survival game. They were fighting for their lives, and they had already started at a disadvantage. She didn't run, she was already prepared. While the others tried to figure out what to do, she already knew where to go, which equipment still worked, which routes were safe, and which had already given way. Her advantage wasn't strength, it was foresight. It wasn't imposed leadership, it was foresight, because only those who respect the environment are guided by it, and the ice, though cruel, seemed to spare her, as if it recognized her as an ally, not an enemy. While many were still trying to understand how everything had collapsed so quickly, she was already leading the group toward the only still functional underground shelter. It was the place she'd been eyeing for days, the only one with reinforced insulation that no one considered because it was too old and too cold. But it was there that the ice couldn't penetrate. It was there that survival was still possible, and it was there that she led them. The same people who had laughed at her now followed her orders. Those who had mocked her watchful gaze now depended on it to keep them from dying. Those who had disdained the cold now shivered, not only from the temperature, but from regret. And as they walked behind her with each step in the snow, she said nothing, because those who warned in silence also save in silence. Comment with one word. What does contempt for the invisible usually cost? While the others screamed, she listened. While the officers fought head to head, trying to impose orders no one else could follow, she remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the details that escaped most. Her every breath was measured, every silence intentional. And contrary to what they thought, her lack of reaction wasn't a lack of courage, but an excess of lucidity. In the midst of the collapse, where fear wore uniforms and hysteria wore patents, she became what no one expected, the fixed point in a world spinning out of control. Her silence cut deeper than any scream. It wasn't passivity, it was calculation. While everyone competed for space, for attention, for salvation, she analyzed the scene as if she already knew the outcome. She observed patterns, listened to frequencies, a whisper of vibration on the right wall, a repetitive crackle in the ceiling of the north wing, the oscillation of the ventilation system. To the others, just insignificant noises. To her, signs. To her, truths hidden beneath the smoke of disorder. In her mind, everything unfolded like a war game. Each piece moved silently. Each decision was formed between heartbeats and silences that seemed eternal. But in that silence, she didn't just survive. She prepared to take charge, not because she wanted power, but because she knew that if it weren't for her, no one else would have the foresight to navigate the crisis. And the truth is, it had always been that way. From the beginning, she didn't need approval, applause, or imposed authority. She simply saw beyond. Deep down, many had underestimated her. They judged her as weak, withdrawn, emotionally fragile. She didn't flaunt her muscles, she didn't use her voice to dominate rooms, nor did she engage in backstage ego battles. But those who pay attention quickly discover she knew things no one else ever told. Her silence was so sharp, it cut through arrogance. And now, in this chaos, looks began to change. People, even without understanding, approached her. It was as if her calmness had a magnetic field, as if her very body was saying, "Follow me," even without words. As the auto-lock timer reached its final minutes, she didn't run, didn't scream, didn't panic. She simply moved with precision. She grabbed the physical map of the base, something no one else had considered because they were overly reliant on digital systems that were already failing. She used a hidden analog radio, whose frequency she had secretly restored weeks earlier, when she noticed intermittent glitches in the main system, glitches everyone chose to ignore. And in that moment, what they had previously called control freak became a salvation. She didn't give orders. She simply said, "Come." And they did. One by one, soldiers and technicians began to follow her. Not because they were under command, but because they recognized the strength that didn't need to be shouted to be felt. Her gaze said it all. If you want to live, trust. And even the most skeptical, those who had previously mocked her introspective manner, now treated her as a last beacon before total darkness. On the way to the auxiliary control room, she gathered tools, checked levers, and opened manuals with codes she'd memorized over the previous months. While everyone thought she was just another silent figure, she was silently preparing for this very moment. The truth is, she didn't need anyone to know what she knew. She just needed someone to listen to her at the right time. And now, they were listening. What few understand is that true power comes not from the volume of one's voice, but from the clarity of one's mind. And she had it. She was like a chess piece playing on a checkers board. While others advanced on impulse, she moved strategically. She was 5 steps ahead, even though she was always the last to speak. Because, unlike the others, she only opened her mouth when she already had the entire plan in mind. Her silence was mistaken for fear, but those who observed her closely knew she wasn't trembling, she was calculating. She didn't hesitate, she was observing. It was as if her ears could hear what no one wanted to hear, the secrets of the base, the failures of the leaders, the whispers of fate. And this made her dangerous to those who thought power was synonymous with noise. She didn't need the spotlight. She was the silent light that pierced the darkness. Deep down, she had already anticipated that something would go wrong. She studied all the evacuation plans, analyzed alternative routes, made mental notes that no one else considered relevant. And when the chaos finally arrived, she didn't need to run. She simply walked with the certainty of someone who always knew this moment would come, and that, when it arrived, she wouldn't need to prove anything, because in the end, it's always silence that survives the scream. Commentary: have you ever been called too quiet, in your own head, distracted? What if that's actually your greatest strength? Tell us if you're one of those people who, in silence, sees what no one else sees. That night, the sky seemed clearer than usual, as if waiting for something. The base remained enveloped in an unusual silence, not the welcoming silence of calm nights, but the kind of silence that seems to contain a held breath, as if nature itself were hesitant to take the next step. And then the wind blew, first as a whisper among the metal structures, then stronger, sharper, bringing with it a warning, a sound in the ice, a thin, distant, but sure crack. Everyone ignored it, except her. It was at that moment that her eyes fixed on the exact spot where the sound came from. The others were too engrossed in conversation, in routine protocols, in the false sense that everything was under control. But she knew. It wasn't just the ice. It was the omen. It was the kind of sound nature emits when it's about to complain, the kind of sound that carries an ancient message, one that translates not into words, but into consequences. And she understood, before anyone else. Even before the ice began to truly give way. She stood up slowly, as if every part of her body had grasped something the others' minds still refused to accept. The wind now whistled between the towers, a high-pitched, irregular sound, like a desperate warning no one truly heard. It was as if the screams had been replaced by a dark chant of creation itself. And she knew. When the wind speaks louder than the screams, it's because something has already slipped out of control. The base's sensors still hadn't detected anything out of the ordinary. The devices continued to blink at their artificial rhythm, deceiving tranquility. But she trusted her own instincts more than any electronic system. After all, systems only respond after the damage begins. But the eyes, those see first. The eyes of someone who has learned to read the environment, to hear the subtle signals. And she listened. The crack continued to grow beneath the frozen ground. It wasn't just any crack. It was a fracture in trust, an invisible rupture in the logic of security. While others laughed or slept or argued over trivial matters, she was already mentally counting the minutes. Because she knew that the kind of disaster that comes with the wind doesn't warn twice. It arrives, takes over, and changes everything. And once it changes, it doesn't come back. The noise grew louder, a dull crackling sound from underground. The vibration rippled through the structures, but still weak enough to be ignored by those not paying attention. But she was there, and every part of her body reacted as if she'd been through this before, as if she'd already experienced this kind of change. And she had, because some people sense danger before it even materializes, and she was one of them. She crossed the corridor with calculated steps, not out of fear, but out of strategy. She knew running too soon would attract attention. And attention was something that at that moment could be wasted. She needed to observe a little longer, confirm what her heart had already screamed. And as she left the control room, the wind hit her in the face like a slap of reality. It was different. It had weight. It carried with it the pressure of something about to happen. She looked up at the towers. Steel cables vibrated like strings about to snap. The lights trembled. The masts creaked. The ground began to emit louder, more distinct cracks. Now it was visible. Now everyone would start to notice. But it still wouldn't be enough, because people only react when chaos is already upon them. And that's why few are remembered as leaders, because most just run but don't understand. She understood. Something was coming with that wind. It wasn't just a change in temperature. It was a change in course. In reality, it was as if fate itself had shifted direction that night. The irreversible event wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, psychological, symbolic. A line had been crossed, and she was the only one who realized it in real time, the only one who could do something before everyone was lost. She activated the plan no one wanted to hear when she proposed it. The protocol, they said, was unnecessary, overkill. But now, as the ice threatened to crack beneath the barracks and the wind seemed to drag the structures from within, it all made sense. She was the only one with the keys, the only one who knew the alternative route, and yet she was still there waiting for the right moment to act, because she knew that time is a minefield, and taking a step too soon can be as fatal as taking one too late. The final sound came like thunder, the complete rupture of the lower ice sheet. The ground shook, the lights went out, screams, now the screams. But they came too late, and the wind was still louder. Then she closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the part where she would begin to lead, because deep down, she always knew she would only be noticed when everyone else stopped pretending they knew what they were doing. What about you? Have you ever felt like you were the only one to spot a disaster before it happened? Comment here. What would you do if the wind changed tonight and only you understood the message? The ground gave no warning. It made no noise beforehand. It emitted no signal. It simply gave way as if it had grown tired of sustaining so much arrogance, so much false certainty, so many looks of contempt disguised as superiority. The fall wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It was the collapse of illusions, because the moment the first scream of fright echoed, it wasn't just one person who disappeared into the darkness, it was the entire group's sense of invincibility that crumbled with it. They weren't prepared. Not for this. Not for the fact that the terrain they'd mocked was actually a test, and they failed. They failed because of overconfidence, because they looked down their noses at the one who warned. And now, amid the silence that followed the impact, only the sound of their own growing fear remained. No one laughed anymore. No one joked anymore. Because when the first person slipped and disappeared into the abyss, something else slipped inside each of them. Pride, the sense of control, that childish impulse to think everything can be solved with improvisation or sarcastic phrases. The sound of the body disappearing was drowned out by a deeper echo, that of conscience which began to scream within each of them, "What if you're next?" But it was too late for regrets. The ground had already spoken, and the ground respects no titles, brute force, or irony. It responds to the vibration of the soul, and theirs at that moment trembled with doubt. It was at that moment that they began to run, but not by direction, by instinct. It was a disorganized race, without leadership, without clarity. Each step echoed like a reminder of what they had lost, their calm, their logic, their advantage. One stumble, and it could all happen again. Every shadow became a threat, every sound a sentence. The first fall was like the fuse that burned the line until the final explosion. And worst of all, they knew they were running not only from danger, but from the truth they had refused to hear before. This place had its own laws. And those who disregard them pay, with the ground, with fear, with their very presence. As they ran, each remembered the words they ignored, the recommendations they thought were exaggerated, the looks they gave the only person who warned them, the one they called weak, fearful, out of place. And now she was the only one keeping her eyes steady, while everyone else stumbled over their own arrogance. The fall, deep down, wasn't a surprise. It was a consequence. And the cruelest thing is that it was slow enough for everyone to see, slow enough that no one could pretend it hadn't happened. They saw it, and that was what shattered them, witnessing that the abyss is real, and you can open yourself up at any moment. The race turned to panic. And in panic there is no reasoning. There is desperation, a misstep, an arm gripping another with excessive force, a look that begs for help and finds no response. They were no longer a group. They were loose pieces, struggling between fear and regret. And anyone who saw them before, confident, defiant, arrogant, would never have imagined that a crack in the ground was enough to reveal their true selves. And perhaps it will always be this way. The first fall doesn't just serve to eliminate, it serves to expose, to remove the collective mask and reveal who is the first to run, the first to accuse, the first to abandon. But there was something even deeper. The echo of that fall continued to resonate. It was as if the place had swallowed that life and, with it, opened a portal of chain reactions. Nature, silent until then, began to respond with subtle noises, and this made it clear that this ground was not neutral. It reacted, it observed, it punished. Their laughter had awakened something, and now it was no longer about reaching the end. It was about not being next, and that changed everything. The priority was no longer winning but surviving. The game had changed, and there were no written rules, only consequences. Every meter they ran seemed more hostile. The lights flickered, the dust thickened, the sounds grew sharper, as if the structure itself wanted to speak, or scream, or demand. And every memory of the previous minutes weighed like lead. That moment when they had underestimated their surroundings, that look of contempt cast at the voice that had tried to warn them. That mocking comment. Now all of this became an invisible weight on their shoulders, because when the fall happens, the conscience weighs more than the body itself. The group no longer argued, debated, or debated. They just ran. And the silence that formed was as loud as the scream of someone who disappeared, because absence has a sound, and the void left by the fall was too loud to ignore. Each one now carried the fear of being the next echo, the next absence, the next proof that mocking the unknown is playing with one's own fate, and fate had already turned its back. Comment here. Have you ever seen someone pay the price for underestimating something or someone? Amidst the chaos, only one pair of eyes knew what to do, and they weren't the commander's eyes. They weren't the eyes of the decorated officers, nor the most senior. They were hers, the one who, until a few minutes ago, was just another face among many. The one who came and went from the sidelines, who was invisible in meetings, who always had the right ideas but was silenced by the louder sound of other people's egos. Now, as everything crumbled around them, as the noise of bad decisions echoed in the form of sirens failing and doors sealing themselves, everyone looked at her for the first time. And it wasn't just any look. It was the look of someone suddenly realizing they were surrounded by noise, and that only that silent presence provided direction. She didn't shout. She didn't order. He didn't need to bang on the table. She simply moved with the calm of someone who had already studied every flaw before it occurred. 1 step, 2, 3. Every movement was watched, at first with suspicion, then with curiosity, finally with urgency, because deep down, everyone knew they were lost. And for the first time, they accepted that perhaps she held the answer no one else did. The narrow corridor became an invisible stage. She passed by frightened bodies, raised voices, and directionless leaders. And then the unthinkable happened. Someone asked her what to do. Just that. A question. An opening. And it was as if the veil of hierarchy had fallen away completely. Because contrary to what many imagined, she already had the entire plan in mind. But she hadn't used it before because she knew it wasn't just about knowing. It was about knowing when to act. And in that moment, when the last one to scream fell silent, the time had finally come. She indicated the route, not arrogantly but clearly. Her words were simple but accurate. She pointed out a forgotten access point, revealed a flaw in protocol that few had noticed, described the sequence of actions with such precision that it seemed she had rehearsed it for years. And indeed she had, but in silence. While she was ignored, she observed. While she was interrupted, she took notes. While she was underestimated, she practiced. And now, all of this unfolded before the incredulous eyes of those who, until then, hadn't even remembered her name. The group began to follow her, at first, hesitantly, but with each precisely executed turn, each anticipated obstacle, doubt gave way to admiration, and admiration to trust. They didn't say it out loud, but they knew. They were alive because she took charge. And more because she didn't hold a grudge against being ignored. She simply did what needed to be done. True leadership is born this way, not from imposition, but from the ability to stand firm when everyone else is falling apart. As they walked, the same people who had ignored her began to repeat her words. They reinforced her instructions. They tried to imitate her tone. And she, instead of feeding her pride, remained focused. Because now it wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about saving lives. It was about accomplishing what she knew she could do, even if it took them so long to give her space. But now that she had the remote control, there was no turning back. Respect had changed hands, and no one dared to challenge it anymore. At the end of the route, as the group emerged from danger, she stopped, not out of exhaustion, but out of awareness. She looked around and saw in the sweaty, panting faces a kind of reverence that cannot be asked for. It is earned, and no one could pretend they didn't see her anymore. All eyes were on her. For the first time, yes, but with an intensity that would forever mark each of those survivors, because they finally understood that they had placed their trust for too long in titles rather than in competence, found that in times of crisis, the true leader is not the one who speaks the loudest. It is the one who knows what to do in silence. She didn't apologize for being right. He didn't rub his accuracy in anyone's face. But her silence was different now, no longer one of invisibility, but of unquestionable authority. And no one could get close without feeling inferior for not having realized who she was sooner. She never needed to prove anything. She simply waited for the moment when the truth imposed itself, with the brute force of reality. When security was restored and the shadow leaders attempted to reclaim their positions, no one listened to them with the same reverence, because something had changed forever. The one who was invisible was now the point of reference. The one who had been cast aside was now the one everyone wanted to hear. And even if they tried to deny it, they knew. She had saved the base, not by luck, not by chance, but by competence, preparation, and courage, and by something even greater, vision. She saw it all before, and when the world stopped, she was the only one who kept going. Now answer honestly, have you ever ignored someone who, deep down, was perhaps the most important piece of your own success? Comment below if you've ever seen someone ordinary become extraordinary when no one else knew what to do. While others wasted time debating possibilities, she was already walking with the route clear in her mind. When they mocked the strange way she observed the walls, the rocks, the small details of the landscape, she was mapping it all. And it wasn't distraction, it was anticipation. A skill few develop, but one that makes those who possess it practically inevitable on the day of crisis. While superiors discussed protocols and soldiers blindly trusted the automated systems, she remembered every corridor, every fork, every sign hidden in the terrain. What seemed like obsession was, in fact, salvation in disguise. And when everything failed, when Plan A turned into ruin and Plan B proved suicidal, she didn't hesitate. She simply pointed in the right direction, the only route that wasn't on paper, but was entirely inside her head. The irony screamed. Those who laughed when she chose to study the old files instead of drinking in the veterans' lounge now walked behind her, as if she were the compass. And, in a way, she was. The silence that had so disturbed her became authority. Introspection that confused others became strategy. That woman who avoided confrontation, who refused to participate in ego contests, was precisely the one who had already visualized all the escape routes long before the first siren sounded. She didn't have divine vision. She had discipline. As the noise confused others, she became more precise, and in the moment of collapse, when the maps burned, the satellites crashed, and the compass spun out, she simply followed the path she already knew. The most disconcerting thing wasn't that she knew where to go, it was that it all seemed so natural. There was no triumphalism, no ostentation. There was just focus. She wasn't acting like a heroine, she wasn't expecting applause. But the eyes of the soldiers who had previously ignored her now shone with a mixture of fear and admiration. Because only she knew. Only she had the safe route. And more than that, only she knew why it was the only possible path. When asked how she was sure, she simply said, "I saw it before." But no one asked when she saw it, or why she was looking for it in the first place. The answer lay in the silent shame of someone who realized they'd spent too much time underestimating those who didn't care to be noticed. While the leaders wasted time searching for coordinates, she had already memorized every curve, every blind spot, every marker left by previous missions. She didn't collect praise, she collected possibilities, because deep down, she always knew this moment would come, not out of pessimism, but out of clarity. She didn't improvise. She prepared. And this irritated many, because society loves to praise those who improvise miracles in chaos, but despises those who prepare to avoid them. She was that rare type, the type who trains in silence, who pays attention when no one else is, who asks questions no one cares about, and who, when everyone panics, already has an answer ready, not because she's smarter, but because she's more attentive. They walked through tunnels that seemed abandoned, along routes no one dared to tread anymore. But she was certain, because she studied the forgotten reports, because she listened humbly to the veterans' stories, because she mapped out risks everyone thought unlikely. And now, those same men who had mocked her need to understand every inch of the base were now asking her to explain everything again, as if her explanation alone carried weight. And it did, because it wasn't just theory. It was accumulated experience. It was observation. It was strategy without spectacle. She never sought to impress. She wanted to understand. And she understood so much that she survived first, and then she helped others survive too. The most decorated soldier in the group could barely hide his embarrassment as he walked behind her. The general, who had never spoken directly to her, now repeated his commands with a 5-second delay, trying to maintain the appearance of authority. But everyone knew she was the one in control, and not because she had seized power, but because she already had it before anyone realized it. The respect she commanded didn't come from fear, nor from rank. It came from accuracy, and accuracy came from preparation. She visualized the map while everyone mocked the landscape, and now those who laughed clung to the only remaining shred of salvation, her. She walked steadily, her flashlight low, speaking little, acting a lot. Her gaze was clinical, her decisions cold. But her heart, warm enough to guide everyone, even those who despised her. Not because she forgave easily, but because she knew the mission was greater than anyone's ego. While they wallowed in vanity, she moved forward toward the solution. Now, each step she took was a chance at survival for dozens of lives, and little by little, everyone there began to understand. She wasn't just someone who knew the way. She was the path itself, because she had already walked within herself before stepping outside. What about you? Have you ever thought about how many times you've overlooked someone who was simply preparing to save you up ahead? Comment here if this story made you see someone you'd ignored until you realized they, or she, had the route to your next destination. Everyone's heavy breathing filled the shelter as if the oxygen there had a different weight, not just physical, but symbolic. Each step into that new reality was accompanied by an uncomfortable sensation, the realization that the rules had changed, that titles, badges, louder voices, and shiny medals had lost their value. Those who once commanded now walked in silence, watching, listening, and for the first time learning to follow. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. She was now the compass, the girl who was never heard, the soldier who always stood on the sidelines of groups, the one who, when she spoke, was ignored. When she gave her opinion, she was corrected. When she warned, she was considered exaggerated. But now, faced with the collapse that turned the world upside down, the tables were turned, and no one could deny it. Everyone was alive because she knew what to do when no one else had any idea what was happening. It wasn't a forced leadership. There was no speech. There was no imposition. There was action, clarity, control, and most importantly, vision. She saw it first. She anticipated when everyone was distracted, and when the structure crumbled, she didn't hesitate. She took the map. She gathered the resources. She formed a plan, and she led, naturally, without permission, without applause, simply because it was what needed to be done. And now, inside the shelter, amid bruised faces, wounded pride, and deafening silences, the new order was established without needing to be announced. Everyone knew. It was no longer about who was in charge. It was about who knew how to lead, and she led. They learned to obey those they had always ignored. It didn't take long for people's perspectives to change. Some watched her with genuine respect, others with embarrassment, many with silent admiration. But they all had one thing in common. No one dared doubt her anymore. The rejected became a role model. The forgotten became a leader. The weak became the balance. Those who once gave orders now asked for instructions. And the most curious thing, they asked humbly. Because ego has a limit, and that limit is survival. When life is at stake, you discover who truly matters, who thinks quickly, who sees far ahead, who doesn't break under pressure. And she didn't. While the most technically prepared lost control, she mentally calculated every possible detour. While those who constantly screamed despaired, she organized the evacuation with precision. And while the arrogant wavered between pride and indecision, she was already on the path that would save everyone. Now the roles were reversed. But this reversal was no anomaly. It was justice, poetic justice, the kind of justice that doesn't need to be explained, only felt. The ancient leaders were merely survivors, fragments of what they thought they were, and she was the center, the reference. Not because she demanded it, but because she proved it. And that hurt. It hurt many. Because they had to see everything crumble to recognize it. They had to nearly die to see it. They had to lose themselves to hear the voice that had always been there. Calm, firm, ignored, but there. The previous system had failed because it was built on appearances. Now what worked was what resisted, what endured, what saw, and only she had seen the danger before. The old leaders didn't know where they were, literally. Without maps, without command, without structure, they were lost. And she was already rescheduling guard shifts, establishing rationing rules, assessing what would be necessary to endure the coming days. While the others were still dealing with the shock of the inversion, she was already working on the continuity plan. The new order was silent but relentless. The basis of trust had been shifted. And when trust changes hands, power follows. They didn't just obey. They leaned on it. They consulted. They questioned. They followed. And all of this with the kind of respect born not of fear but of admiration, because there what mattered most wasn't strength, it was the mind. And hers was a beacon in the darkness. But she didn't insist on command. That was the beauty of it all. She led because she knew, not because she wanted to dominate. And that made her even more unquestionable. Her lack of ego made her the only one capable of making decisions without emotional contamination. While the old leaders worried about pride, she thought about survival, and that made her stronger than all of them combined. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew she was now the commander, not on her badge, not in the official records, but in the heart of the group. She was the one who set the course, she was the one who saved the wounded, she was the one who kept the others quiet and carried on, she was the one who gave hope amidst the chaos. And perhaps the most impactful part of all this was realizing that if it all happened again, everyone would follow her again, without hesitation. Because they finally understood, a leader isn't measured by the amount of voice they have. It's measured by the clarity they offer when everything is dark. Comment here. Has it ever happened to you that you were ignored by everyone until the moment they needed you to survive? When the ice finally stopped, no one celebrated. There were no shouts of victory, no applause, no euphoric hugs. There was only an eerie silence, a heavy silence laden with lessons no military manual could teach. The entire base seemed to breathe heavily, as if they knew deep down that they had survived, but not unharmed. Because yes, they were alive, yes, the threat had ceased, but it had cost them dearly. It had cost them pride, it had cost them certainties, it had cost them masks, and perhaps above all, it had cost them arrogance. They who once marched with their heads held high, believing they knew everything, that they controlled everything, now walked more slowly, with careful steps, as if treading on sacred ground. Because the ground was still covered in layers of ice, not the kind you see but the kind you feel, an invisible cold that now made its home within each of them, reminding them with every breath that they were not invincible. The fear passed, but the respect remained. And more than that, the knowledge that they had underestimated the wrong person. Her, the woman they ignored, the discreet figure, the constant but silenced presence, the one whose name they knew but never listened to, the one who endured sidelong glances, malicious commands, veiled tests of authority. She was the other option, the plan B, the one who helps, the one who observes, the one who doesn't bother. Until the day everything fell apart, and only her voice remained to guide their steps. And now, with everything in ruins and the foundation struggling to rebuild, the same people who cast her aside didn't dare break their silence. Because it was this silence that now commanded more respect than any uniform. She demanded nothing. She didn't rub it in anyone's face. She didn't need a speech or a promotion. What she had was something no one there could simulate: legitimate authority. The kind born of pain endured in silence. The kind built behind the scenes, while others flaunt their talents. The kind that flourishes in humiliation, but matures at the right moment, when everything around her cries for leadership, and all official leaders fail. Now, as they cleared the wreckage, adjusted the systems, and counted the supplies, she simply walked. Her steps were neither hurried nor hesitant. They were firm, conscious, and full of presence. And the most striking thing was how, without saying a word, she had become the base's new point of reference. They wanted to know what she was thinking, even if she didn't say it. They watched her gestures, tried to interpret her gaze. Even her superiors, who had previously ignored her, now waited for her opinion before making a decision. Not because she demanded it, but because respect, when it's genuine, manifests itself unprompted. But it wasn't just the environment that changed. She had changed too. There was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a firmness in her countenance, a look of someone who had seen the worst up close, not just of the world, but of people, because it wasn't just the storm outside that froze her soul. It was the contempt, the isolation, the feeling of being treated as invisible until the moment everyone desperately needed her voice. That leaves a mark. That can't be erased with an apology or a belated bow. And even now, with respect established, there was something about her that would never return to the way it was before. The sweetness she once had in her gestures was no longer the same. Her easy smile became rare. She wasn't bitter, but she was scarred. And anyone who looks closely can see there's an emotional scar she carries with dignity, but one that still pulsates. Her constant reminder that, as strong as she once was, she had to be extra strong because no one was there when she needed it most. This, perhaps, is the hardest part for everyone around her to swallow. They respect her, they admire her, but deep down, they know. They failed her, and they failed badly. And now there's no undoing what was done. They can try to get closer, praise her, invite her to decisions, offer her positions, but what she lost in that cold, no one can give back. She lost her naivete. She lost the illusion that kindness will always be recognized in time. And in exchange, she gained something much more valuable: discernment. Now she knows exactly who is who. And this knowledge changes everything. She doesn't close herself off. But she also doesn't open herself up to any gesture. She listens but doesn't absorb easily. She observes, analyzes, waits. Because she understood that trust isn't a gift given. It's a value earned, and can be lost in seconds. And those who hurt her, even if they now venerate her, are still paying the price for their own blindness. The ironic thing is that, deep down, everyone grew from the pain. The storm froze their bones, but melted their vanity. Those who mocked sensitivity now find simple gestures moving. Those who saw only brute force now value quiet wisdom. The base continues to function, but with a different soul, more human, more cautious, more aware that sometimes leadership comes from where it's least expected, and that the true hero is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who endures silently until the moment everyone realizes that without him, nothing would have worked. Now tell me honestly in the comments, have you ever been invisible until the day you proved your worth? How many times have you walked past someone in silence and thought they weren't worth listening to? How many times have you come across people who didn't raise their voices, who didn't assert themselves, who didn't compete for attention, and thought they were irrelevant? Life, in its almost cruel wisdom, has a way of teaching us through twists and turns. Today, perhaps you remember someone who had the last laugh, someone who was ridiculed and then applauded, someone who seemed to have nothing, and in the end, it was the only way out. At that base, amidst the chaos and the fall of the great, an unexpected truth emerged like a beacon. Noise was never proof of leadership. Her silence for months was merely the surface of something much greater: preparation, discernment, strategy, and faith. Yes, faith. Because only those who trust God more than human recognition remain silent. Only those who understand that the greatest battles are won first in the spirit before they become visible walk in silence. She was ignored, questioned, tested, and underestimated. But she didn't back down. She watched as they mocked her. She calculated as they scorned her. And when everything collapsed, she already knew what to do. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for permission. She simply acted. Because those trained by God don't need an audience. They need a mission. And when the mission arrived, she was ready. She was the only one who knew the way, the only one who had seen the flaw in the system, the only one who, even without a position of authority, became the pillar of everyone's survival. And now I ask you with faith and sincerity, how many people around you are being ignored simply because they don't shout? How many souls are carrying maps, strategies, miracles ready to happen? But no one sees, no one hears, no one considers them. Could it be that the next person who could save your life, your business, your family, your project, isn't this very moment being ignored? And worse, have you yourself ever been or still are that person, silently waiting for your chance to act, but being crushed by the label of weak, unfit, invisible? The truth is, history repeats itself. Everywhere. Every day. Because the world still insists on associating strength with volume, leadership with poise, authority with status. But real life, the one God directs with invisible hands, follows a different pattern, a fairer, deeper, more spiritual pattern, where the least becomes the greatest, where the last will be first, where the despised become the answer, where the silent bear the fate of many. And you, who have read this far, know that this is no coincidence. This message found you for a reason. Because perhaps God is saying, stop ignoring those I have chosen, and stop doubting what I have given you. Perhaps you are beside someone who is on a path to miracles, or perhaps you are exactly that person, waiting for the moment to be heard, to be seen, to be useful, but needing, above all, to trust that your time comes for those who remain faithful. Today, her name is repeated silently by those who once laughed. They tell her story with shame in their eyes and admiration in their voices. Because when everything fell apart, she was the one who held it together. And this memory echoes through the corridors of the base as a warning. Next time, look twice before judging someone's silence. If this story made you reflect, reminded you of someone, or even helped you see yourself in a new light, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. In the next video, we'll reveal what happens when the unlikely is anointed by heaven to rule. Are you ready to find out who else is being overlooked, but carries a prophetic destiny? Have you ever seen someone underestimated become the only way out? Comment here.